On a storm-torn night in Montana, a wounded K9 staggered through the snow, bleeding, barking, desperate, until he reached the front porch of a lonely farmhouse. His eyes weren't wild, they were pleading, as if he was asking for help one last time. Behind him, buried in the blizzard, lay his handler, a police officer shot and left for dead. But here's the part that chills the heart. The attack didn't come from criminals. It came from within the very force sworn to protect the town. Stay with me for just one more minute, and I'll tell you how a battle-scarred veteran, an 8-year-old boy with one wooden arm, and this dying dog uncovered a secret that shook their small Montana town to its core. I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Leave your country in the comments below. And before we begin, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that even in the coldest storms, courage still finds a way. The night over Montana screamed with cold, the kind that seeps through walls and bones alike. The wind roared over the timber ridge, tearing through pine needles, rattling window panes, howling like an animal that had lost its way home. The world beyond was nothing but white, an ocean of snow swallowing fences, trees, and even the stars. Inside a lonely cabin, light flickered from a dying fire, dancing over two faces that time and silence had bound together. 8-year-old Samuel Cole pressed his cheek against the frosted window, his breath fogging the glass. His small wooden arm, carved from pine, sanded smooth by his father's hands, clutched the sill. He didn't remember what a quiet night used to sound like, because in Montana, even the silence had teeth. Something stirred out there, a shadow staggering against the wind. At first, Samuel thought it was a deer. Then, as it drew closer, he saw the heavy gait, the thick fur matted with snow, and something darker. Blood. A German shepherd. Huge and scarred, dragged itself through the storm. One paw slipped, and the dog collapsed under the fence, body shuddering with exhaustion. Its eyes glowed faintly amber through the stormlight. Wild, pleading, almost human. Samuel's chest tightened. He turned, voice cracking. "Dad, there's a dog outside!" From the back room came Raymond Cole, 55 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, but carrying the kind of weight only memory can give. His hair had gone the color of iron, his face lined by the years he'd spent at war and the years he'd spent trying to forget it. The veteran moved quickly, no hesitation, just instinct. In seconds, he had thrown on his wool coat, grabbed the lantern, and stepped out into the storm. The door flew open, wind and snow bursting in like ghosts. Raymond knelt beside the animal. The collar was battered but clear. Max, K9 unit. The dog's breathing came in sharp, uneven bursts. He lifted his head slightly, pressing his muzzle against Raymond's sleeve, not seeking warmth, but urging him to look past the fence, toward the dark line of trees where the forest began. Something else was out there. Something waiting. Inside the cabin, Samuel watched through the window, his reflection trembling beside the flame. He couldn't hear what his father said, only saw the shape of the man and the dog, two silhouettes bound by the storm. Then Raymond's hand tightened on the lantern. He turned to shout over the wind, "Stay inside, Sam! Lock the door and keep the fire going!" The boy hesitated. He wanted to argue, to run out, to help. But the look on his father's face, steady and sharp, froze the words in his throat. He shut the door, pushed the latch down, and stood there listening to the howl of the wind swallow the sound of footsteps fading into the night. Raymond's boots sank deep into the snow as he followed the trail. Max stumbled beside him, limping but determined, nose low to the ground. The lantern's flame fought against the wind, flickering gold across white drifts and frozen pines. Every few yards, a splash of red marked the snow, the dog's blood, dark as ink beneath the pale light. Raymond's breath came heavy, rising like smoke into the blackness above. The cold bit into his skin, but the soldier inside him had known worse. He pressed on. 100 yards from the cabin, the forest opened slightly, the pines bending under the storm. Beneath one of them, something glinted. A hand, then a badge. A man lay half buried in snow. His uniform stiff with ice, his body twisted as though dropped by the wind itself. Raymond dropped to his knees, brushing snow from the man's chest. The name tag read, James Walker. A young officer, late 20s maybe, clean-shaven with frost clinging to his eyelashes and lips that barely moved. Raymond pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. A pulse, faint, fragile, but there, alive. The old training returned without thought. Pressure on the wound, airway clear, body turned slightly to breathe easier. He took off his scarf, pressed it against the bleeding side, and whispered through gritted teeth, "You're not dying out here tonight." Max limped closer, lowering his head to sniff the man's face, then looked up at Raymond and whined. The sound was soft, like grief remembered. The veteran glanced toward the tree line. The storm's wail had shifted, not random anymore, but rhythmic, as if it echoed from engines somewhere far beyond sight. He lifted James, slinging him across his shoulder. The man was heavy, cold seeping through the uniform, but Raymond pushed forward. Max stayed at his heel, panting, each step leaving a smear of blood behind. Snow fell harder, thick flakes swirling around them like ash from an invisible fire. Halfway to the cabin, the dog stopped suddenly and turned toward the ridge. His ears rose, body tense, throat rumbling. Raymond followed his gaze. Through the curtain of white, 2 faint headlights blinked, once, then again, before vanishing into the storm. The sight sent a shiver colder than the wind itself down his spine. He didn't wait to see if they would return. Adjusting his grip on the unconscious man, he trudged through the snow, the cabin light faint in the distance, flickering like a dying star. Max followed close, limping but resolute, his breath misting in the dark. Behind them, the mountains swallowed the sound of footsteps, leaving only the endless hiss of snow against earth. The world had turned quiet again, too quiet. As Raymond stepped through the cabin door, Max barked once, weak but sharp, a warning rather than relief. Out beyond the ridge, unseen but real, the faint glow of those same headlights pulsed once more, before the storm took them completely. Inside the cabin, the storm's voice dulled to a low growl, like some distant beast prowling the edges of the dark. The walls creaked under the weight of snow, and the air smelled of smoke, pine, and fear. Raymond knelt beside the couch, his sleeves rolled up, his calloused hands steady as he pressed a wad of gauze against the officer's wound. Every few seconds, blood seeped through the layers, thick, slow, stubborn, as if refusing to let go of its warmth. The fire hissed behind him, the only sound alive in the room besides the shallow rattle of breathing. Across the rug, Samuel crouched beside Max, wrapping the dog in a towel that was far too small for his heavy frame. Max's fur, black and brown like wet soil, steamed faintly near the fire. His chest rose and fell unevenly, one paw twitching when Samuel whispered something soft into the space between them. The boy's wooden arm rested awkwardly against the floorboards, but his other hand moved gently, wiping the snow from the dog's ears. "It's okay, boy," he murmured, barely louder than the crackle of the flame. Max turned his head slightly, pressing his nose into the child's wrist, his breath warm against Samuel's skin. On the couch, the man in uniform stirred. His lashes fluttered once, twice. A sound escaped his lips, broken, fragmented, yet urgent. "Not the criminals!" His chest hitched. "The badge!" The word trailed into a faint whisper, and his body sagged back into the blankets. Raymond froze mid-motion. His mind caught the meaning before his heart allowed it to sink in. The badge. The one thing a man like him never doubted, now turned traitor. He looked down at the blood-stained gauze, the emblem on the officer's shoulder dull beneath frost, and understood. Someone inside the law had done this. The wind rose again, moaning across the chimney, and the lantern light trembled. Raymond stood, wiping his hands on his jeans, the shadow of resolve hardening over his face. Outside, the storm no longer sounded random. It had rhythm, breaks, pauses, like steps muffled by snow. Max's ears flicked toward the door, then the window, his body going still. He growled low, deep enough that it seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Samuel looked up. "Dad?" Raymond raised one finger to his lips, the soldier's command needing no words. He reached for the rifle resting by the mantel, checked the chamber with quiet precision, and moved toward the window. The fire's glow shrank as he turned down the lantern's wick until the room bathed in half-darkness. The faint blue light from outside bled through the frosted glass, shaping every breath into mist. For a long moment, nothing moved. Only the slow creak of branches and the whisper of snow shifting under unseen weight. Then, crunch. A single step, then another. Slow, deliberate, circling. The kind of movement made by a man who wasn't lost, but looking for something. Max rose, his injured leg, trembling under his weight, but his gaze fixed on the door. Samuel reached out instinctively, wrapping both arms around the dog's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the fur, the pulse beneath the skin. "It's okay, boy," he whispered again, though his voice shook this time. The storm filled the silence that followed, pressing against the cabin like a tide. Raymond peered through the frost-lined window. At first, all he saw was white. Then a darker shape emerged, a silhouette standing perfectly still at the edge of the yard. The figure wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed sheriff's hat, its brim weighted with snow. No motion, no words, just a shape listening. Raymond's heart thudded in his ears. The man's posture was wrong, too calm for a stranger in a storm. He wasn't seeking help. He was waiting. Minutes stretched thin as wire. Raymond held his breath, rifle poised but low. Inside, the fire sputtered, sending up a thin hiss of steam. Samuel pressed closer to Max, whose gaze never wavered from the window. The boy could feel the dog's heartbeat hammering beneath his palm. Then, without a sound, the figure moved. A subtle tilt of the head, a shift of shadow, then a slow turn away from the cabin. Through the fogged glass, Raymond saw the man's boots sink deep into the snow, each step leaving dark impressions that caught the faint lantern light. The pattern of the footprints was deliberate, measured steps heading back toward the main road, toward the town. Raymond exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle but not his guard. Something about the way the figure left, the composure, the silence, chilled him more than the storm itself. Men who intended harm didn't always knock. Sometimes they just listened long enough to know where to strike. He turned the lantern off completely, the cabin falling into a hush lit only by the faint ember glow. Outside, the wind swallowed everything, erasing the footprints one flake at a time. By dawn, the wind had grown tired. What was once a furious white roar had thinned into a quiet sigh over the trees, leaving the world blanketed in a heavy stillness that almost felt dishonest, as if the storm had buried its own crimes beneath the snow. Raymond unlatched the cabin door, the old hinges crying out against the cold, and the first breath of morning swept through, sharp, brittle, clean. The horizon was a dull band of gray, the kind that made time itself seem to hesitate. And standing there, framed by the pale light, was Sheriff Dalton Pierce. He was a man built of lines and edges, tall, broad through the shoulders, with silver dusting the ends of his black hair. His coat was immaculate despite the storm, a dark wool trimmed with leather that gleamed faintly. The badge pinned to his chest caught the meager light like an eye that never blinked. He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile meant to comfort. It sat wrong, the way a knife might gleam too long before being sheathed. "Morning, Cole," Dalton said, his voice smooth and confident, each word shaped by years of command. "Storm tore up half the county. You haven't seen anyone hurt or stranded, have you?" Raymond stood half in shadow, half in daylight. The ache in his shoulders reminded him that he hadn't slept. "Just me and my boy here," he replied evenly, his tone flat but polite, the kind that neither invites nor rejects suspicion. Behind him, the faint crackle of the fire carried through the room, and a shape under a blanket, the unconscious officer, lay still on the couch. Dalton's eyes swept the cabin like a searchlight. They paused on the blanket's subtle rise and fall. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He simply smiled again, slower this time, like a man playing chess and already seeing 3 moves ahead. Max growled from the corner, a low rumble that broke the still air. The sheriff's gaze flicked toward him, and for the first time, something like curiosity or warning crossed his face. "Fine-looking shepherd," Dalton said, shifting the brim of his hat with deliberate ease. "Didn't think I'd find one like that way out here." "Wandered in last night," Raymond answered, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the door. "Seemed lost." Dalton chuckled, but it was hollow. "Funny thing," he said, glancing down at the muddy paw prints frozen on the porch. "Looks like one of ours." He let the words hang in the air, heavy with implication, before tipping his hat again. "Keep safe, Cole. Not all strays belong to the wild." The way he said it made the cold bite deeper. Then he turned, boots crunching into the snow as he walked back toward his truck. The rumble of the engine started, echoed once between the pines, then faded down the road. Only silence remained, and the faint hiss of melting ice dripping from the roof. Raymond closed the door carefully, as if afraid the sound might break whatever fragile barrier had just kept them alive. Samuel appeared from the corner, his face pale beneath the dim morning light. "Dad," he whispered, voice trembling. "He knows." The words felt too big for the boy's mouth, too heavy for his age. Raymond looked at him, then at Max, whose body was tense, eyes still fixed on the door. "I know," Raymond said quietly, though his tone carried no panic, just the old weariness of a man who had seen betrayal before and knew how quietly it walked. He crouched beside the fire, stirring the embers with the iron poker. Sparks leapt upward, brief and bright, before fading into the smoke. "We stay calm. We stay ready." But Max didn't relax. His ears were perked, his breathing shallow, and his gaze had shifted, not toward the door now, but the window. Raymond frowned. The dog rose slowly, limping across the floorboards, nose working the air. He stopped near the wall beneath the window and sniffed once, twice. Then, with a sudden growl, he pawed at something half buried under the thin layer of snow that had drifted inside through the cracks. Raymond leaned closer. Beneath the frost and wood dust, something glinted red. A small circular blink, rhythmic and steady. A listening device, no larger than a coin. Its faint light reflected in Max's eyes like a burning ember. For a long moment, neither man nor dog moved. The realization settled like a shadow across the room. The conversation, the officer, the storm, none of it had been private. Dalton hadn't come to ask. He had come to confirm. Outside, the woods stood utterly still. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge, and the snow reflected a dull metallic glow. Raymond's breath came slow and deliberate, his mind already working through what came next. Samuel stepped closer, gripping his father's coat. "Dad," he said again, barely a whisper. "What does it mean?" Raymond looked out through the frost-streaked glass, his reflection splitting between shadow and dawn. "It means," he murmured, "we're not alone." And then Max's head lifted sharply, his body tightening like a drawn bow. His gaze shifted past the window, toward the line of trees beyond the fence. The deep rumble started again, low and primal, rolling up from his chest. Raymond followed his stare. In the distance, the edge of the woods seemed to move, just barely, as if something, or someone, had been waiting for the sheriff's truck to leave before stepping out. The fire crackled. The red light blinked once, then twice. Max growled louder. And the morning that had seemed so quiet suddenly felt like it was listening back. Night had settled deep over the mountains, the kind of stillness that made every flame and every heartbeat feel louder. The cabin was no longer shelter. It was a waiting room between fear and resolve. Raymond sat near the fire, his face half in shadow, while James Walker, pale and drenched in sweat, fought his way back from the haze of fever. When he finally spoke, the words came out fractured but burning with truth. "It wasn't the cartel," he rasped. "It was us, the sheriff's department. Dalton Pierce runs it. Guns stolen from evidence, sold out of state. I found proof. That's why they came for me." Raymond froze, then turned toward him, reading the trembling eyes that begged to be believed. There was no deceit there, only the raw, frightened honesty of a man betrayed by his own badge. Raymond exhaled slowly, the soldier in him recognizing another man who had once sworn to protect, not destroy. "You're one of the good ones, James," he said quietly, "and good men don't die quiet." As James drifted back into half-consciousness, Raymond's gaze fell upon the faint red blink beneath the window, the listening device. Its tiny light pulsed like the heartbeat of deceit. He crouched, tracing its casing with a fingertip until he found the direction of the transmission. The signal pointed straight toward the sheriff's department. A grim smile crossed his lips. "You've been listening, Dalton, but let's see how well you can follow lies." He gathered the old military radio from the storage chest and began rewiring the small device. Samuel crept closer, curiosity bright in his eyes. Together, father and son worked in silence. Raymond connecting circuits, Samuel holding the flashlight steady with his wooden hand. Max lay nearby, alert but calm, his gaze flicking between them. "We'll send him a false trail," Raymond murmured. "He'll think we're running north while we go west." They recorded snippets of conversation, fabricated plans about heading for the quarry road and needing a boat at dawn. Samuel's young voice wavered, then steadied as Raymond guided him. "Perfect," Raymond said softly. "Dalton will believe every word." The boy smiled faintly, the wooden fingers tapping against metal like the rhythm of hope. Outside, the wind clawed at the roof, but inside they flipped the switch. The hum shifted pitch, and their trap began to speak, broadcasting ghosts to the predator who thought himself a hunter. Miles away, in a field office near Helena, an FBI communications technician caught an unexpected ping on a restricted channel. A data burst carried a code. K9 Unit 117, Max. The man frowned, isolating it. "Sir," he called to his supervisor, "we've got an active law enforcement K9 signal on a non-department frequency. Could be a hijack." The senior agent leaned in. "Trace it." And so, unknowingly, justice began to move. As dawn broke, frost coated the cabin, glass. James stirred weakly, murmuring names, locations, shipments, threads of truth too dangerous to leave behind. Raymond loaded the truck in silence. He glanced at Samuel, whose backpack hung from his small shoulder, wooden hand gripping tight. "Are we running, Dad?" the boy asked softly. Raymond zipped his coat and met his eyes. "No, son. We're driving toward the truth." They helped James into the passenger seat. Max limped but refused to stay behind, climbing in beside Samuel. Raymond started the engine, the old truck groaning awake. The road wound downward, lined with pines heavy under snow. Behind them, the cabin vanished into the mist. 10 minutes later, light flickered in the rearview mirror. 3 headlights moving fast. No sirens, just silent pursuit. Raymond's voice dropped low. "Hold on, Sam." The first shot cracked the morning. A bullet tore through the tailgate. The second shattered the rear window, glass spraying like frozen rain. Samuel screamed. "Down!" Raymond barked, jerking the wheel. The truck fishtailed through ice. Max rose, muscles coiled, eyes locked on the dark shapes behind them. When one cruiser drew close, the German Shepherd launched through the broken window, slamming into its windshield. The car spun, metal shrieking, before tumbling into the ditch. Samuel shouted his name, but Raymond kept his focus. "He's trained for this. Keep low." 2 more vehicles closed in. Raymond floored the pedal, engine roaring, tires skimming the edge of the road. Then, up ahead, the fog split with a blaze of red and blue. Flashing lights. Not Dalton's. The bold white letters on the vehicles glowed through the haze. FBI. Raymond's breath caught. Samuel looked up, wide-eyed. Real sirens cut through the cold morning. Sharp, righteous, unmistakable. And behind them, through the smoke and snow, Max's body stirred. Weak, but alive. Raymond gripped the wheel tighter. For the first time, his heart beat not in fear, but in faith. The valley erupted in light and motion. Headlights and sirens collided with the cold air. Flares bursting against the snow like veins of fire across white stone. The narrow pass was no longer wilderness, but a cage of steel and sound. FBI trucks blocked the road ahead. Agents in heavy coats poured out, their boots carving dark marks into the frost. Behind them, Dalton Pierce's men slammed their brakes, the convoy screeching to a stop as realization rippled through them. They were surrounded. Sheriff Dalton stepped from his truck like a wounded beast, his breath sharp clouds against the dawn. The man who had always spoken with calm authority now looked raw, stripped of the uniform's illusion. His face, lined and sun-scorched, twisted with rage as the red and blue lights painted him in judgment. "Hold your fire," he barked. but the words came too late. From across the snow, Raymond Cole emerged, coat torn, eyes cold, rifle steady. The two men stared at each other through the rising haze of frost and light, old soldiers on opposite sides of the same broken oath. Dalton's smirk cracked into something bitter. "You think this ends here, Cole?" His voice was hoarse, defiant, the bravado of a man cornered. Raymond didn't answer. Behind him, Samuel crouched in the truck's shadow, his wooden hand gripping the doorframe as Max, still bleeding from his leap, dragged himself forward through the snow. His fur, chestnut darkened by blood, caught the morning light, every breath a struggle. A sudden shout split the air. Agents flanked both sides of the pass, rifles trained. One of them, Agent Carter Hale, a tall man in his 40s with a hard jaw and gray at his temples, raised his hand and yelled, "Sheriff Dalton Pierce, drop your weapon and step back!" Dalton froze, eyes narrowing as he caught sight of the bureau insignia glinting on Hale's jacket. He finally understood. This wasn't chance. They had intercepted James Walker's encrypted message, the one he sent seconds before the bullet found him. Rage twisted Dalton's features. "You think I'll let you parade me like a criminal?" he spat, drawing his sidearm in a single motion. Raymond shifted his aim. The air held its breath. "Don't!" he warned, his voice calm but final. The sheriff's answer came in a gunshot, the flash of betrayal that had defined his life. But before the bullet could find its mark, Max moved. The German shepherd launched himself through the snow, a blur of muscle and fury. He hit Dalton square in the chest, the gun firing wild, the round grazing Raymond's sleeve before tearing harmlessly into the air. Both man and beast crashed into the drift, a spray of snow rising like smoke. Dalton hit the ground hard, his weapon flung from his hand. The agents surged forward, shouting commands that cut through the echoing gunfire. "Hands where we can see them! Sheriff Dalton Pierce, you are under arrest!" Their voices layered, over each other like waves. Dalton struggled once, then twice before Agent Hale's knee pressed him into the ice. Cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists, the sound of finality. Raymond lowered his rifle, his hands shaking only now that it was over, but the relief lasted a heartbeat. Max lay half-buried nearby, chest rising unevenly, blood soaking into the snow beneath him. Raymond ran to him, dropping to his knees, hands instinctively pressing over the wound. "Easy, boy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Stay with me, you hear? You stay with me." Samuel stumbled through the snow, falling beside them, tears streaking his wind-chapped cheeks. "Dad, he saved you." Raymond nodded, jaw clenched. "He saved all of us." Around them, the valley that had once been a trap now thrummed with the noise of justice being restored. Agents shouting orders, vehicles repositioning, the sound of handcuffs and radio calls echoing into the cold. Agent Hale approached, his expression softening as he knelt beside Raymond. "We got the message, Cole. Walker made sure the truth didn't die with him." He glanced toward the mountains, the sun beginning to break through the clouds. "Your dog, he did good." Raymond swallowed hard, looking down at Max. The German shepherd's eyes fluttered, half open, catching a sliver of dawn light. His tail twitched weakly against the snow. Raymond's hands stayed firm, steady despite the tremor in his chest. "You did it, partner," he whispered. "It's over." For a long moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Then the wind shifted, soft and warm for the first time in days. The snow no longer howled but sighed, the storm finally spent. And as the light spread across the ridge, Max's eyes flickered open, reflecting the gold of a new morning, while the mountains above seemed to exhale at last. The corridors of Helena Veterans Hospital were hushed, filled with the soft rhythm of distant footsteps and the steady beeping of monitors. Outside, the snow still clung to the edges of the windows, but inside, warmth reigned, a gentle, living warmth that no storm could erase. James Walker lay propped up on a white bed, his face pale but alive, breath steady beneath the hum of machines. The lines of pain had softened into the calm of a man who had survived the fire. At the foot of the bed, Max rested, his chest rising and falling in slow, peaceful cadence, one ear twitching at the faint noises of the ward. Raymond Cole sat nearby, the same stillness in him that had once been battle-forged, now transformed into gratitude. His coat hung over the chair, sleeves torn, and on his hands, faint stains of dried blood, not his own, lingered like memories that refused to wash away. For the first time in many years, his posture was not that of a man on guard, but one at peace. The faint morning light spilled through the blinds, falling across the bed and pooling around Max like a quiet halo. The door opened softly. Samuel entered, his small frame wrapped in an oversized hospital sweater, sketchbook tucked under his left arm. The boy's wooden hand clutched the corner of the paper, careful not to tear the page. His eyes brightened when he saw Max stir slightly, a faint thump of a tail greeting him. "Hey, buddy," Samuel whispered, smiling. "You're still the toughest of us all." He climbed up beside his father, the bed dipping under his slight weight. "I drew us," he said, holding out the page. The drawing was simple but full of heart. Raymond standing beside Max and James, the sky above them streaked with falling snow. Below, written in Samuel's uneven handwriting, were the words, "Heroes don't always wear uniforms." Raymond stared at it for a long time, his breath catching. His hand, calloused and scarred, rested gently on his son's shoulder. "That's right, son," he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. James stirred, eyes fluttering open, the color slowly returning to his cheeks. He looked between the two generations sitting beside him, the man who had saved him and the boy who reminded him what was worth saving. "You've got a good family, Cole," he whispered. Raymond nodded, smiling faintly. "I got lucky twice," he said. "Once when the storm spared us, and again when it gave me a reason to fight for something more than myself." Samuel leaned against his father's arm, closing his sketchbook carefully. Max lifted his head, pressing his muzzle against Raymond's leg, the same gesture he had used 100 times before on the long roads, the nights of silence, the moments between life and loss. Raymond's eyes softened, and he whispered, "You did good, partner. You found your way home." The German shepherd's tail brushed once against the blanket, slow and steady, as if to say he understood. Outside, the valley stretched under a sky no longer gray but pale blue, touched with sunlight. The icicles along the eaves began to drip, one drop, then another, tiny notes of spring hidden inside winter's last breath. Nurses moved quietly in the hallway, their voices low and kind. Somewhere down the corridor, a radio hummed an old country tune about coming home after the storm. Raymond leaned back in his chair, his hand still on Max's fur, the other resting over Samuel's wooden hand. In the stillness of that moment, there was no sound of gunfire, no echo of the chase, only the soft breathing of those who had endured and the peace that comes after the longest winter. As the sun climbed higher, its rays spilled across the room, touching the faces of man, child, and dog alike. The snow outside began to melt, running in silver threads down the window pane. The storm had gone, but the warmth it left behind, the quiet kind born of loyalty, courage, and love, remained. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They linger, in the quiet breath of a dog at peace, in the steady hand of a father who's finally stopped running, in the eyes of a child who now knows what courage looks like. Loyalty isn't always loud. It doesn't march or shout or demand to be seen. Sometimes it lies in the snow beside a fallen friend, or in the small, trembling act of choosing kindness when fear would be easier. And courage, it's rarely the fire we imagine. More often, it's the ember that refuses to die out, the one that keeps burning quietly through the cold. The world will keep turning, storms will come again, and most will never know the names of those who held the line in silence. But somewhere, in the spaces between thunder and dawn, their light still flickers. So if you ever find yourself walking through the quiet, and you feel something warm beside you, maybe it's just the echo of a promise once made by those who never stopped believing that goodness, no matter how small, still matters. And maybe that's enough.